You have seen this moment painted 1,000 times. The mother upright and glowing, the linen white, the light soft and golden falling like a blessing across her face. Forget all of it. You arrive instead into a room with the shutters closed, and the air thick with tallow smoke and old blood, and the sour animal smell of a body that has been laboring since before dawn. No one here is calm. The woman on the straw is not glowing. She is gray. She is somewhere past screaming now, making a low sound that does not seem human. And the hands reaching toward her have not been washed, because no one yet believes they need to be. This is the moment your whole species is built around. And for most of history, it was the closest thing to a death sentence a person could be handed while still being told to be grateful for it. Breathe in first, before you look at anything. The air in this room is its own event. Sweat and tallow and the copper smell of blood already spilled. And under all of it, the smell of a body that has not left this floor in a day. There is a pot in the corner that no one has emptied. There is old bread going hard on the table, because the cooking stopped when the pain started, and no one has thought about food since. The fire is kept high even in summer, because the cold is believed to be an enemy with intentions. So you are standing in heat and smoke, and the walls are sweating with it, and every breath tastes faintly of iron. Understand that this did not begin an hour ago. The first pains came in the night before last, a tightening low in the back, easy to ignore, and then not easy to ignore. By morning, the waters had broken, and the real work had started, and everyone had gathered, and the fire had been built up, and someone had run for the midwife. That was a day and a half ago. There is a warm drink pressed into her hands between the worst of it, a caudle of spiced ale and bread and whatever the house can spare, because she has to keep some strength, and this thin, sweet mess is the only medicine anyone can give her that actually does something. She is exhausted in a way sleep does not touch. Her body has been at the hardest physical work a human body performs, and it has not stopped, and it cannot stop, and it will not stop until this is finished one way or another. Now start with the bed, because the painting always gives her a bed. Clean linen pulled tight, a pillow behind her back, sunlight coming soft through a window. There is no window. The shutters are closed and stuffed with rags, because the old belief says cold air and evil spirits come in together, and both will steal the child. The light is a single tallow candle, and the smoke of it settles on everything. She is not on linen. She is on straw laid over the floorboards or the packed dirt, and the straw is there for one reason only. It is there to be burned after. No one wastes a good mattress on this, because everyone in the room knows how this can end, and knows what the straw will look like by morning. If she is poor, the room is the only room, the same room where they cook, where they sleep, where the animals come in from the cold. If she is rich, there are curtains, heavy velvet drawn around a carved bed, and there is a fire, and there is wine. But the velvet does not change the arithmetic. The rich woman and the poor woman are running the same terrible odds, and the curtain only means fewer people will hear it when it goes wrong. Look at who is in the room, because the painting keeps it quiet and holy and nearly empty. It is not empty, it is full of women. No man is allowed past the door, not the husband, not the priest, not the Lord. The husband is somewhere outside, pacing or drinking or pretending to work, and he will not be told anything until it is over, one way or the other. Inside, it is a crowd of neighbors and aunts and the woman who has done this street's births for 30 years. They are called the gossips, and they will not leave for days. They talk, they pray, they hold her, they take turns, because a labor can outlast the strength of anyone watching it. This is the one moment of a woman's life, run entirely by women, and the men have handed it over precisely because it frightens them, and because for a very long time, they had nothing to offer it. Most people were only ever shown the painting, never the room. If you would rather see the room, the real one, then subscribe and stay in here with me. because the unpainted version of history is the only kind we tell on this channel. Now look at the hands. The painting gives you a serene attendant, a woman with a calm face and pale, clean fingers arranging cloth. The real hands have dirt under the nails. They have been in the hearth and in the animal pen and in the last 3 births this week, and they have not been washed between any of them, because the idea that something invisible travels on a hand and kills has not been born yet. The midwife wears her rings. She keeps them on because taking them off never occurred to anyone. And if the labor is hard, she may reach inside with those rings still on her fingers. She means well. She is often the most experienced person in the village at this, and she has caught more children than any man alive. But experience without knowing about infection is a woman doing her absolute best while carrying death from one mother to the next on her own skin. Look at how the woman is holding herself. The painting lays her back flat and gentle, like she is resting. No one giving birth for most of history lay flat, because lying flat fights the body. She is upright, she is squatting over the straw, or she is gripping a knotted rope hung from the beam and hauling on it with every wave that moves through her. She is sitting on a birthing stool, a heavy wooden seat with the middle cut out, and 2 women pressing down on her shoulders, and a third kneeling in front with her arms ready. The stool is old. It has been in the village longer than anyone remembers. It has been under hundreds of women, and it is never truly clean. She has been in some version of this position for hours, sometimes for a full day, sometimes for 2. And by the second day, everyone in the room has stopped meeting her eyes. And there is nothing for the pain. Nothing. The herbs do almost nothing, the wine does a little, and mostly the answer to the pain is that she is not supposed to escape it. The pain is understood as a debt, a curse handed down and owed and to be paid in full. A woman who screamed too much could be told she lacked faith. A midwife who offered real relief could be accused of witchcraft, because easing this particular agony looked like interfering with a punishment that had been ordered from above. So she suffers on schedule, and she suffers out loud, and the room treats it as the natural cost of being born a woman. Hours pass like this, and the candle burns down and is replaced, and burns down again. Someone wipes her face. Someone holds a cup to her mouth. Someone keeps the fire fed. And every woman in that room has done this herself, or watched her mother or her sister not come back from it. They all carry the same private arithmetic. A woman might go through this 5 times, 6 times, 10 times across her life, and each time was another roll of the same loaded dice. And enough women lost that every bride knew someone, a cousin, a neighbor, a friend, who had walked into a birth healthy and left it in the ground. They married knowing it. They went to the straw knowing it. Outside, the husband knows it too, and that is why he cannot sit still. He is not banned from the room only by custom. He is kept out because he can do nothing, and everyone, including him, understands that his fear would only fill a space that needs steadier hands. So he waits and listens to a wall and tries not to count the hours. And slowly the mood in the room tells you more than any words, because these women have seen this 100 times, and they can feel when a birth is going the right way and when it has started to go the other way. And then there is the moment the painting actually claims to show, the moment the child arrives. It is not clean, and it is not gentle, and it is not quiet. There is the crowning and the burning and a final effort that seems to take everything left in her, and then a slick, sudden weight and a rush of fluid onto the straw. The child does not cry at once. There is a pause that stretches too long while everyone in the room holds a breath they will not admit to holding. And when the cry comes, it is thin and furious, and the whole room moves at once. The cord is tied with a thread and cut with whatever blade is nearest, often the same knife that cut the bread. And there is still the afterbirth to come, which everyone watches for, because if it does not come whole, and soon it too can kill her. If you think the worst of it is already behind her, the pain, the hours, the exhaustion, it is not. Because everything so far assumes the child is coming out the way a child is meant to come out. Now imagine it does not. Imagine the baby is turned wrong, sideways or feet first, or the shoulder catches, and the whole thing simply stops. Before you go any further, be honest with yourself. A day and a half on that straw, no way out. The door that would not open. Tell me in the comments whether you think you would have lasted the night. Today, this is a surgery and a healthy morning. Then, it was the edge of the world. There was no clean way in. If the labor obstructed and stayed obstructed, the woman could push against a door that would not open for 2 days, 3 days, until her strength was gone and infection had already started its slow, quiet work inside her. The midwife tries everything her hands know. She turns the child, she reaches for a foot, she pushes, she waits, she prays over the belly. And when everything she knows has failed, the men are finally called. Not doctors as you would know them, a barber surgeon, a man whose trade was also pulling teeth and cutting hair and bleeding the sick. He arrives with a roll of iron, hooks, blades, a thing called the crochet, a long metal shaft with a sharp curve at the end. And here the story becomes what no painting will ever show you. Because in an obstructed birth before real surgery, there was often only one choice left, and it was between one life and none. The instruments were not there to save the child. They were there to remove it, so the mother might live. The surgeon works blind, by feel, in the dark, reaching in with cold iron while the woman is held down by every hand in the room. And the sound that fills that room is a sound you do not forget and were never meant to hear. And sometimes it saved her, and sometimes it did not, and both of them were carried out at dawn, and the straw was gathered up and burned exactly as everyone had known from the first hour it might be. There was another door, and it was worse. If the mother was already dying or already dead, and the child still moved, they would cut. No anesthetic, no stitching, no real hope for the woman, only a desperate reach for the one life that might still be pulled from the wreck of the other. This happened in villages, and it happened in palaces. The queen with her physicians and her gold was not standing on higher ground. She was often standing on lower ground, because the men who attended her were prouder and more willing to interfere, and more likely to reach for a blade to prove they had done something. Against all of this, the world offered protection, not medicine. Protection, a birth girdle, a long strip of parchment inked with prayers, wrapped around the belly like a bandage of words. The eagle stone, a hollow rock with a loose piece rattling inside, believed to hold the baby in when tied high, and draw it out when tied low. Relics borrowed from the church, a saint's belt, a holy nail carried from the altar to the bedside by a running servant, a knife laid under the straw to cut the pain, a key placed on the belly to unlock the womb, an open jar to keep the passage open by sympathy. The woman clutched a medal and whispered to a saint who had died a virgin and so knew nothing of this, and the room prayed with her, because prayer was the best available tool, and everyone in that room knew it. And none of it could do the one thing that killed most often. None of it could stop bleeding. Because here is the part that even the survivors of the birth itself did not always survive. The child comes, the cord is cut, the room exhales, the danger feels finished, and then she begins to bleed, and does not stop. There is no way to close what is open inside her. No clamp, no stitch, no drug that contracts the wound shut. She is talking, then she is cold, then she is quiet, then she is gone. It can take 20 minutes from a living mother holding her newborn to a body being washed while the newborn is handed to a neighbor who is already nursing her own. Fear makes the whole room look the same eventually. The wealthy woman bleeds at the same speed as the poor one. Her silk absorbs it. That is the only difference. And if she lived through the blood, there was still the slow killer waiting. A fever that came on the second day or the third, a heat and a shaking, and a poison spreading from the inside. From the wound, the birth had left. And no one knew where it came from, so no one could stop it. And a woman who had done everything right, who had delivered a healthy child and smiled and slept, could be dead by the end of the week. for reasons no one in the room could name. And then finally the doctors came, and for a long stretch of history they made it worse. When men of medicine took the birth into their hospitals, they brought the one thing the old village midwife never had. They came straight from the dissection room, from cutting open the dead, and they walked to the living mother without washing, and they carried on their fingers a fever that spread bed to bed down the whole ward. Childbed fever. Women who had delivered safely, who should have walked home alive, burned up 3 days later in institutions built to help them, dying in far greater numbers than the ones who had given birth on straw in a closed cottage with a woman who could not read. The cure, when it came, was almost insultingly small. Wash your hands. That was it. That was the whole revolution. That plain water and scrubbing between one body and the next was the thing standing between the painting and the grave. And the man who first begged doctors to do it was mocked and broken for saying it, because it meant admitting that the healers had been the ones carrying the death from the dead to the newly born. If this room feels too real, that is exactly the point. And tapping that like button is what pushes it in front of the next person with a strong enough stomach for the unvarnished thing. Say she lives. Say she comes through the blood and the fever and wakes on the other side of it. It is not finished. She is not allowed back into the world clean. For weeks, she is kept in the darkened room, in what was called the lying in. And when she finally leaves it, she cannot simply walk out. She is considered unclean by the birth itself, and she must go to the church to be purified before she is allowed to cook, to touch holy things, to rejoin the living. The act that continues the species was treated as something that stained the one who performed it. And even the recovery split along the same line the rest of her life ran on. The lady lies in for a month in a warm, shuttered room with sweets and broth and visitors and a nurse for the child, and she is not expected to lift a finger while her body knits itself back together. The poor woman has days, sometimes hours. There are other children who need feeding, and animals that do not care that she is torn and bleeding, and a harvest that will not wait for her body to heal. She is back at the fire and back in the field with a newborn strapped to her, still leaking, still weak. And this is why the same number of births broke so many more of the poor, because the rich were allowed to survive slowly, and the poor were not allowed to survive at all. Disaster reveals rank quickly, and nothing revealed it faster than who was permitted to rest afterward. Look last at the child at the center of all of this, not the plump, laughing infant of the painting. A small, tightly wrapped bundle, bound in strips of cloth, arms pinned straight to the body, because they believed a baby left loose would grow crooked. If it was born with the caul still over its face, a sheet of the birth sac clinging to its head, this was kept and dried and sold to sailors as a charm against drowning, because even the leftovers of birth were pressed into use against death. The child is often not named for days, not out of cruelty, out of arithmetic. So many did not last the first week that a mother learned not to spend a name and a heart on something she might have to bury before it was 10 days old. Love was rationed because grief was guaranteed. And if the mother had died, the child was passed to whichever woman in the village still had milk. The rich had always done this by choice, handing the newborn to a wet nurse in another house, so the lady could recover her figure and her social calendar. The poor did it out of pure survival, because a motherless infant with no one to nurse it had almost no chance at all. A new wife was often found for the husband inside the year, because a farm and a house full of children could not run on grief alone. Her name might survive on a stone, if the family could afford a stone. More often it survived nowhere. And this is why the clean version won. Why the glowing mother and the golden light hang in every church and every gallery, while the straw and the iron and the closed shutters were left out. Not because anyone was lying exactly, but because the truth of it could not be sold, and could not be hung on a wall, and could not be prayed to. The real thing was too much, so they painted the miracle and buried the cost. If you made it this far, all the way into the room, then you have the stomach for the rest of them. Subscribe so the next door stays open. And tell me in the comments which part of this you were never taught. Every person who has ever lived came through a door exactly like this one. A dark room, a body pushed past its limit, a set of odds no one chose. The golden light was never the truth of it. The truth of it was the straw and the closed shutters and the women who stayed, and the ones who did not get up again. And the cost was paid over and over, in the same kind of room your grandmother's grandmother was born in, by a body on the straw, being told even then to be grateful.